Welcome to the World of Eora, a news and lore podcast about Pillars of Eternity and Avowed, as created by Obsidian Entertainment. I'm your host, Eric, aka Gingerino. Thank you all for listening. Let's get into today's lore. Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the World of Eora, and I am your host Eric aka Gingerino, and it's very good to be back behind the microphone. I know to you guys it's probably, me saying I'm back doesn't mean anything because you had an episode a couple weeks ago, but I haven't been in front of the microphone for well over a month, just because I've been working through the Christmas season with UPS, and it's still pretty busy. It takes a while for things to wind down, but this is the first time I've actually been able to sit down, do research, record something, and put it out for you guys. So it's nice to be back. For those who are new to the show, welcome to the show. This is a lore program where we go through the lore of Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2 as we gear up for the release of Avowed, because all of those games share the same fantasy setting known as Eora. And a lot of you, if you are new, you'll be hearing about Avowed because it's coming out in a little over a month at this point in time. If you've got early access to it by ordering the premium edition, you actually will be getting it in one day over a month. Such as myself. So it's very exciting. This game, developed by Obsidian, is coming out really soon. It's got a really expansive and wonderful world to explore through Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2. And that's what we do here. If you're new and you want to learn more about the world, or you've played through the games and you just want to re-explore some of that stuff. If you are new, I'm going to recommend that you check out episode 0. It just signposts you towards other episodes that have some of the more foundational lore for the world. But as the developers at Obsidian have pointed out numerous times, it is not necessary to play Pillars of Eternity 1 or 2 or know anything about the World of Eora before Avowed comes out. This is just content here for you if you're interested in that kind of a thing. Now, that being said, today's episode is going to be a little bit, I don't know if spoilery is the word. It's going to be very speculative. But we're going to be talking about the apocalyptic literature that we see in the Forgotten Sanctum DLC, which is a DLC for the second Pillars of Eternity game set in the Deadfire Archipelago. There are these 4 books that are part of a series of books that you can find in-game, and you can read a little passage from each one of them. And these passages allude to things that might happen in the future, mostly of the cataclysmic nature, or like complete cosmological unraveling and things like that. So that's why I call it the apocalyptic literature, even though I don't think it necessarily fits into the genre of like historical apocalypse literature, but I'm not an expert in that stuff. So whatever, I'm just using words to help you understand what I mean. So that's what we're going to be covering today. And again, I'm not going to try to talk about spoiler related content directly, but the topics that we're going to be covering are, I would say, higher up in terms of the lore that we talk about here on the show. It involves knowing a lot of previous lore behind it, and I'm going to do my best to lay down foundations. If I name any terms that I think you might want to know, I'll give you a quick understanding and definition of what that is. But that's just a heads up for today's episode. So if you are new, go ahead and listen, and if it doesn't make sense, maybe go back and check out some of those previous episodes and come back and see if it does make sense. But for those of you who are well versed in the lore of Eora, this should be a fun one to do, and it's been one I've been wanting to do for a while. It seems kind of weird to start off the year with one a little esoteric as this, but this is also a lot of the lore that I know people like myself and others listening really enjoy digging into. So join me, will you, in talking about this lore. There's no other news to really go over. There's a lot of Avowed related stuff that's been going on, but nothing I would say that's like news. I'm pretty sure I covered it on like my previous episodes. There's a lot of Avowed gameplay out if you want to go check out Avowed gameplay, and I think reviews are starting to come out, or they're about to come out. Everyone's just kind of ramping up for Avowed. If anything comes out this week, then obviously it won't be posted in this portion here, so we're just going to dive straight into the lore.
I'm curious, what exactly did you find there?
So as a bit of context for what in-game books we're going to be reading, this is from the second Pillars of Eternity game, Deadfire, and it's specifically in the Forgotten Sanctum DLC. As part of that DLC, there's going to be this area you're exploring, and you need to find these series of books, and you need to use the information within those books to progress past something. These books, it's an anthology of them. They're called The History of Eora, and there are 16 volumes within this game that we're playing. Now, They are supposed to be full books in their own right, but when we look at the item description, we only get like a short passage out of them. And so we don't get to read the entire book. And we're going to be looking at the last 4 volumes of this 16-book series titled The History of Eora. Now, the really important thing to know about these books is that they are hidden from society. These are not books that you can just go to your, local librarian and pick up off the shelf anywhere in Eora. These books have been taken by a group called the Hand Occult, and they are being hidden from society. They have even possibly been doctored or altered in some way, shape, or form. So technically speaking, if Obsidian wanted to, they could say anything written down in these books that we read, including what we're going to read on today's episode, could be falsified, right? So Obsidian could say that. Personally, I'm of the opinion that they aren't, just because, well, A, it's more fun to dive into the lore as if it's true, and B, I also think that they wouldn't hire someone to write lore for this world that would be purposely falsified, or at least the parts that we could read as players. I suppose they could, but whatever. I'm just going to run with it as if it is true. I've given you the disclaimer. You can decide for yourself. There definitely is some information in these particular volumes that is a little bit contradictory to some information in the rest of the world, but it depends on how we view these books. And in particular, I'm thinking, are these books prophetic or are they historical? These last 4 volumes in the books, they seem to be prophetic. They seem to be predicting the future of some sort. Whether that it is a vision that someone had of the future and they wrote it down, or whether it's just a prediction of some sort. But they definitely seem to fit more into the prophetic genre than anything else, rather than historical, which is writing down the stuff that has happened in the past for record-keeping purposes. But enough of that contextual disclaimer stuff. Let's dive into the actual volumes and kind of talk about what we're seeing here. This first book that we're going to be reading today is Volume 13 in the History of Eora series, and it's titled The Last Ice Age. And the description reads, "And so the Weidmouth becomes the yawning mouth through which Remergond drew breath. The beast consumed the souls of the Deadfire and exhaled a miserable cold that swept across the temperate archipelago. In 3 months, Nekataka was encased in glimmering ice, and in 6, Ukaizo disappeared beneath a dune of crystalline snow." And that's it. So it just talks about this kind of like Ice Age apocalypse here. So for those not in the know of what we're talking about here, let's clarify some of these terms. The Weidmouth, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's Vytma with a nich over it, DH. And I always kind of pronounce it Whitemouth, but with a little bit of fantasy flair to it. And this is essentially, if I'm remembering correctly, because there's no link to it, it's essentially a portal or an entryway to the realm of Remergond, one of the gods of this world, and that realm is called the White Void. And Remergond being the god of entropy, cold, death, and simple bad luck, amongst other things. Now, if you've played the second Pillars of Eternity game set in Deadfire, and you've played the Beast of Winter DLC, you'll actually get to interact with some of these things. You'll actually get to go to the Weidmouth. You actually get to interact with a lot of Remergondian narratives there. So I highly recommend playing that DLC if you want to kind of get better understanding for what's going on here. But that's the Weidmouth, and Remergond I've already mentioned. The beast consumed the souls of the Deadfire. The beast refers to Remergond because he often manifests physically in the form of a giant aurochs. And it's saying here that he consumed the souls of the Deadfire and exhaled a miserable cold that swept across the temperate archipelago. So consuming the souls of the Deadfire, that has to do with his realm, which is the White Void. And the White Void is a place that souls go after they die, and the spiritual winds that are within this spiritual realm erode the soul, the very stuff that the soul is made of, basically into dust. And so he consumes these souls and he slowly erodes them into nothingness. And when there isn't anything there, when there's no matter, when there's no energy, you have nothing but cold, right? There's nothing to be hot. And so, being the god of entropy and all that. And it says here that he exhaled a miserable cold that swept across the temperate archipelago. The archipelago referring to the Deadfire archipelago, where the second game is set. In 3 months' time, Nekataka, which is the major city within this region of the world, I've talked about it on previous episodes. It's the main city that we go to in the Pillars of Eternity game, or the second one anyways. And it says here that it gets encased in glimmering ice, and within 6 months, Ukaizo which is a mythological city set in the Deadfire Archipelago, which I do talk about on previous episodes, and it's like a legendary city of the local tribes people in the Deadfire Archipelago, of the thriving civilization that they used to have, and their crown jewel of their society, which is the city of Ukaizo. And it's saying here in this book that this miserable cold that's sweeping across the archipelago not only is going to cover Nekataka, but also this mythological city, Ukaizo, is going to disappear beneath a dune of crystalline snow. And so basically, it's an Ice Age apocalypse prediction, is how I'm reading it. This book is contrary to information that we have from playing the Pillars of Eternity game, because when we explore the Weidmouth and we are interacting with the quests in the Beast of Winter DLC, nothing like this ever seems to happen. Now, of course, this could refer to something later on in the game, like there's no reason this couldn't pop up again and maybe happen again, or Remergon could be up to something, or it could be completely falsified. We don't really know. But in some way, shape, or form, the beast is Remergon. He is consuming souls in the Deadfire, leaving behind basically nothing, and which is freezing, and so he sends that nothingness, that freezing cold, across the archipelago, and he essentially freezes the world. And it's referred to as the last Ice Age. I think the idea being that eventually he consumes all of the souls and there's nothing left at all to heat. Like, it's just the heat death of this world that they're living in. It could also be prophetic to what would happen if we, the Watcher character in the second game, don't interfere with what's going on in the Beast of Winter DLC. So perhaps this is what would have happened if we didn't interfere with those activities. So that's also a possibility. The next entry in this series, The History of Eora, Volume 14, The Vanishing of Godlikes. And this one is specifically, I think, interesting for the context of the game of Avowed, and I'll say why in a second. The description for this book reads, 10,000 of the Fire Crown fell to their knees, and with their power, Mogren called an inferno from the skies. Andra's best beloveds dissolved into a tidal wave that swallowed Rawatai, and Galawain's children, ... It just ends there. So here's the reason this is interesting. And I don't know if this would be considered a spoiler or not. I don't think it would be. It's going to be about a little bit of the purpose behind why godlikes exist. And so while I ramble on about what a godlike race is within this world, you can decide if you want to know more or not. I wouldn't consider it a spoiler, even though you do learn it in game, but it's not part of any mainline narrative. It's just something about the race that we learn, kind of like why they exist and the nature of their existence. So anyways, the godlike people is one of the races of this world. So in these fantasy worlds, you have, humans, dwelves and orcs, and we have dwarves and elves and humans. Those are the three normal fantasy races that we're used to, but in the world of Eora, there are also a few more, because, you have to have your own original race when you have a fantasy setting, right? So we have Orlans, which are these short, hairy dudes, a little bit of a spitfire sometimes, they're pretty fun, and you have these really tall, beefy boys that like to live near water. They are Amauans. If you've been keeping up with Avowed news, Kai is an example of an Amauan, and Yatzli is an example of an Orlan. And there is a sixth race, even though they kind of come about in a little bit less organic means, and that is a godlike race. And actually, you, the player character in the game of Avowed, is going to be a godlike. Now, a godlike character is a person, or a person of the godlike race, is someone who has been blessed or touched by the gods when they were in the womb of their parent. And so, you might have elven parents, you might have human parents, but you were touched by one of the gods, or you were blessed by one of the gods, and you were born as a godlike. So you'll still grow up with kind of the same silhouette or physiology, I guess, of your parentage, but your actual visage, the actual way that your physiology is expressed, will be drastically different from those around you. So rather than growing up a normal human, you'll grow up, as tall as another human, and you might biologically mature as a human person, but your body will be drastically different in what it looks and feels like. So, for example, if you are a fire godlike, as this book alludes to here, you might be someone that has obsidian black skin, like it looks like the top of cooled down lava. You might even have like cracks in your skin that looks like there's something hot just below the surface. Instead of hair, you might have flames on top of your head. You might have devil horns that kind of wrap around your head. Your eyes could just be flames themselves. Like instead of pupils and stuff, it just looks orange, Everywhere you walk, there might be like sparks crackling behind you, kind of thing. So there's a whole bunch of ways that a godlike blessing can express themselves. And the godlike blessings happen through the blessing of one of the gods of Eora. And I've talked about them at length on other episodes, so I'm not going to summarize them here. But basically, each god could bless a person, and that person can be a godlike in their form. So a fire godlike, like someone I just described as, they will be blessed by Magrin, who is the goddess of fire and war. And there are other gods like Andra, who is the goddess of the moon and the oceans and forgetfulness, etc., etc. She would have a marine godlike or a moon godlike, and they will look drastically different than the fire godlike I described. So that's what a godlike person is. Now, a little bit about the nature of what a godlike is, like why godlikes do exist, like why do the gods even bother making godlike? It depends on nation to nation and culture to culture what they think that they're for. Some people, like the Huana tribes in the Deadfire Archipelago, they believe that they are signs. So when a godlike is born, that is one of the gods trying to send a message or an omen to the people of the Deadfire Archipelago. And you look at the events surrounding the person's birth to determine whether the omen is positive or negative. So they think that that's why. But largely speaking, the reason that godlikes are created by the gods are essentially they're just backup batteries, is my understanding of what the lore says, is that these people are God-touched, and so they get the blessings of their god in a way like they might have some innate power about them, and they're set apart from the rest of the world around them. But at any point in time, the god could basically consume their soul energy, or the essence of their soul, which is the stuff that souls are made of, for energy for themselves, because that feeds the gods. It essentially keeps them powerful, or they can use it for powerful things. And so when we read this book here, it says 10,000 of the fire crowned fell to their knees. That's saying 10,000 of fire godlikes. I don't think it necessarily means exactly 10,000. I think it's just meant to say that like a lot of them, possibly all of the fire godlikes across the world, fell to their knees. And with their power, Magrin called an inferno from the skies. So Magrin, the goddess of fire and war, she has decided to take the power, the soul energy from the fire godlikes that she created, and she uses that power to call an inferno down from the sky. And it goes on to say here that Andra, who is another goddess I've already mentioned, her best beloveds dissolved into a tidal wave that swallowed Rauatai. And so she took the energy from her marine or moon godlikes and used that energy to create a tidal wave that would destroy an entire nation, which is called Rauatai. That's the nation that Kai, one of the companions in Avowed, originally came from. And so this particular book here, The Vanishing of the Godlikes, speaks of the gods collecting the power of the godlikes and then using it to unleash large cataclysms upon the world of Eora. As to why, we don't know. It doesn't say here, but that just says that's what's going on. The reason I think this is interesting for the case of Avowed is because it's been pretty well established, even with what little we've seen of the game of Avowed, that the godlike people are starting to disappear off the face of Eora. Now, there's a very good reason at the very end of the Deadfire game for why that might be. I'm not going to say it here in case anyone's new, but there is a reason from that game why they might be doing it. But perhaps as well, could the gods be consuming the power of the godlikes so that they can build up this power and then release it in this cataclysmic form? Is this something that still could happen in the world of Eora? We don't necessarily know. Perhaps this is something that has been averted, again, by the Watcher and their actions in the Deadfire game, but this might also be something that's coming as well. So this is the second kind of apocalypse, this time at the gods' hands, of these books that we're reading.
If you find your trail has run cold, come to me with whatever you have. There is much I may be able to do for you.
The next book in this series is called History of Eora, Volume 15, The Throne of Woodica. Woodica being one of the gods of this world. She's the goddess of right rulership, justice, vengeance, laws, and things like that. She's usually an antagonistic force within the Pillars of Eternity games, and if she's present at all in Avowed, I assume she'd be antagonistic there. Interestingly enough, though, your player character comes from the land of Adir, the country of Adir, and they tend to worship Woodica within that country because they're a very bureaucratic country. They like their laws and their rules and all that. So Woodica is a very big positive force within that nation. But how we might feel about them in the game, we'll see. Anyways, that's who Boudica is, and the throne of Boudica, the title of this book, is important for several reasons, but we'll talk about that in a second. Let's read what the book itself says. Crafted from splinters of anguish and frightened devotion made material, the throne transcended the boundaries of the here and the in-between and the beyond, and in each their turn was forced to kneel before it. They begged, all of them did, the formerly divine and their followers, but the only reprieve they were granted was death. Death and rebirth as her supplicants. So this is talking about a potential other apocalypse that could happen, or end of the world scenario, in which the goddess Boudica returns to her rightful rulership as queen of the gods, powerful above everything. Or at least that's what her followers believe. There is this mythology that within the world of Eora that Boudica used to be the queen of the gods, that she was more powerful than all the gods, but they stripped her of her power in some sort of rebellion and then exiled her from her throne. So even though she is still technically interacting with the gods, which we can see in the Second Pillars game, she has been exiled from the power that she claims she had. Now, I'm not entirely convinced that she was that powerful at some point within the history of Eora, although there is a lot of good reason to say one or the other. The gods never clarify it for us. And her actions and the way the gods interact with her don't seem to scream that this interaction happened with them in the past. But these are also divine creatures who don't think and act like we as humans do. So, perhaps it's not a big deal for them. Anyways, that's just a little disclaimer for me. But the mythology goes is that she was indeed the queen of the gods and that they exiled her power and from the throne. And the throne that she is supposed to sit on is symbolic for her power. When the queen returns and sits on her throne is something that Boudican followers would say, or at least something to that effect. And it has to do with an image of her sitting back in her seat of power, which means that she is back in power again. And she is a god who does not forget being slighted. She is a god that has no loss of memory from wrongdoings, especially against herself. And so it says here that basically when she returns to the throne transcended the boundaries of the here, the in-between, and the beyond. Those are just the three states of living. I'll talk about those in a second. And each in turn was forced to kneel before it. So this book is talking about how she ascends back to power and then uses her power to exact vengeance, or what she would probably call righteous judgment, upon those who opposed her or were not on her side. It says here they begged. All of them did, the formerly divine and their followers, which is almost certainly referring to the gods of Eora, no longer divine or no longer considered divine, in contrast with how powerful she might be. The gods might still be as powerful as they are now, but they won't be anything near what she's claiming she will be when she returns to the throne. And of course, the followers of those gods. And so what she's going to do is she's going to kill everyone. She is going to kill absolutely everyone who was not her follower, and then they will be reborn in this world, because this world runs on a cycle of reincarnation. They will be reborn into this world, but as her followers. So she will somehow reshape their very souls to be aligned with her in some way, shape, or form, and she will control absolutely everything from there on in. So that's what this is talking about here. It's another apocalyptic way of looking at the world, in that Boudica reclaims her power and basically destroys everything and restarts it all in her own image. That's how I'm understanding it. The only last thing I guess to clarify is the here, the in-between, and the beyond, in case you're not familiar. The here is where we are now. It's where we live in the physical, mundane world, and the beyond is where our souls go after we die, and they stay there for a while before they come back to the here in a new body. The in-between is what it sounds like. It's in between the here and the beyond. It's this kind of like liminal state between these two states of living or existence, if you will. And this is where a lot of soul energy is, and this is where watchers look into when they're doing their watcher thing. And this is also where a lot of your magic will come from. So when you cast a spell in any of the games, you're very likely interacting with the in-between in some way, shape, or form. So we are now going to move on to the final entry of this 16-volume anthology of the history of Eora. So volume 16, The End of the Gods. This one simply reads, "And in the final quiet hour, a call came from nowhere. 'Who's there?' the voice of nothing asked, and it was answered by no one. Into the silence, a chorus of wind began to blow a new tune, one no one knew, and echoed into nowhere. Nothing responded with a whisper and the beginning of a word." And that's it there. That's all it says. It's very mysterious. And this really screams, I think this kind of screams of like what happens at the end of any one of these 3 apocalypses that we're looking at here. Whether the Ice Age kills us all, or whether the gods get into a giant battle and they kill everything, or whether Woodaka takes back over everything. At some point, I guess maybe Remergund is right and everything unravels and dies in the end. But this almost seems to allude like something will eventually come back. And I think that this matches the cyclical nature of the metaphysics of this world of Eora, because as I said, it runs on a cycle of reincarnation. You know, you're born, you live, you grow, you die, your soul leaves your body, it goes to the beyond, comes back to the here and now into a new body, and then it just keeps on going and going. And so I could see the same kind of thing happening within the very existence of this world of, you know, life starts and it grows and it grows and it grows, and eventually everything unravels, entropy occurs, heat death of the universe, but then there's something that restarts it all again. You know, there's something like a cold engine in winter that gets turned over and it just starts going again until it gets turned off or runs out of power until it needs to be like refilled. I don't know. That's kind of what I'm getting here. When I read this book, or at least the passage of this book, it says, and in the final quiet hour, and that's why I think it has to do with the heat death kind of idea, the final unraveling, this entropic state that the world of Eora comes into, of everything is unraveling. This is the very end of the world. The final quiet hour, a call came from nowhere. Now, the word nowhere is not capitalized, but I like to think that the idea is that it's coming from nowhere, as if it was capitalized. Like this is an actual place, or it's not an actual place, but it's more of a concept of it's coming from other existence, or it's coming from the next part in the cycle, if you will, or it's coming from somewhere else outside of where we are now. Like think of somewhere that would exist outside our universe, but doesn't exist anywhere, you know, in reality, as far as we can tell. That would be nowhere in a lot of ways. Like what other word would you use to describe that if you had to give it a title? You call it nowhere, right? So like this is how I'm reading it in this really transcendental way, I guess, where a call came from nowhere. So a place outside of our existence. And who's there, it would ask. And the voice of nothing asked. So again, this is not capitalized as nothing, but I'm capitalizing it when I read it, kind of thing. The voice of capital N nothing is how I'm reading it, even though it's not how it's written. Who's there, the voice of nothing asked. Because if there was this entity that was in nowhere, what would it be? Nothing. Because what is nothing, right? Like if it has no actualized power or something like that, if it doesn't do anything, or if it can't interact with anything until everything's gone, then is it the same as anything in the first place? I don't know. I'm getting a little philosophical here. I don't know if anyone here likes or doesn't like that, but there you go. Who's there? The voice of nothing asked, and it was answered by no one. And again, not capitalized, but I'm kind of reading it like that. Is answered by no one. And into the silence, a chorus of wind began to blow a new tune, and one that no one knew. No one, I think, being the only thing left within this world. And it echoed into nowhere, which is the place that the voice of nothing is from, and nothing responded with a whisper and the beginning of a word. So it was answered by no one. So it sounds like a chorus of wind began to blow a new tune. It says one that no one knew, even though it kind of seems to imply that this chorus of wind is being blown by no one, and it echoed into the place that nothing is, which is nowhere, and nothing responded with a whisper in the beginning of a word. And I think that just kind of starts up the entire world again. It like restarts the cycle of universal life and death, if you will. Now, I'm obviously putting a huge spin and speculation on it. I am trying my best to understand a book that is talking about concepts that can't necessarily be, and is being written very well by people at Obsidian. I would love to know, if anyone at Obsidian is listening, who wrote these books, by the way? Like, I'm really curious, like, who wrote this particular series, or even this one particular volume? I would love to know, and also give a shout out to that person, and thank them directly if I could. But yeah, I'm curious. If anyone at Obsidian is listening, I would like to know. But obviously, I think keeping it a mystery, there's a good reason to keep it as a mystery. I asked on Reddit what people thought of these volumes of books, and I've largely recapped a lot of things that people have said here or talked on it. But if you're interested in reading anyone else's thoughts, you can find it on the Project Eternity subreddit. It's titled Thoughts on the Final 4 Volumes of History of Eora Books. And we got a lot of responses on there. But a lot of people mentioned kind of being lost on the last one of like, we don't know what volume 16 is. It sounds like the world ends and comes back. Maybe. We don't know. C. Mushi says, Volume 16, they're interpreting the book as referencing of Engwithans and how they were searching for gods in their early civilization. And the Engwithans are an ancient civilization that existed far before the Pillars of Eternity games. They were very advanced of a society, but they disappeared suddenly, so we don't know what happened there. And this is kind of the book that describes their experiences of what they found, for reasons I don't want to talk about on this spoiler-free episode so far. A Visible Elephant says, Volume 16, eventual end of everything and the start of a new universe, the cycle continues, which is kind of where I line up. It sounds like it's just another cycle again, which I think really matches with the narrative themes that Obsidian created with the World of Eora. So that's why I think that personally makes sense. But this thing being titled The End of the Gods, I wonder if that also ties into the very nature that the gods are intertwined with the fabric of reality, in a sense of like, if they disappear, then the very world itself will disappear, which is really like, at the end of the day, when we try to define what gods are and what gods can do, I would say that's got to be one of the big things about a deity in fantasy or otherwise that makes them way different, is that they are a foundation upon which reality is built upon in the first place. And so when this book is titled The End of the Gods, and it seems to be alluding to this idea that there is nothing left, it's almost kind of communicating that idea of like, when these gods of this world disappear, or if they ever do disappear, then that's it. Everything's over until it starts over again, possibly. That's my interpretation or speculation anyway. But that's it. That's today's episode. That's the lore that we have from these last 4 volumes. And I'm really curious for anyone listening, especially those who are well versed in this lore, but even if you aren't and you're just listening to it and you have ideas as you were listening, I'd love to hear what you have to say about them, any speculations you have, any theories you have, and what it might have to do with Avowed in any way, if there is anything. Send those emails over to worldofeora@gmail.com. And now let's close up the episode asking, what might this have to do with Avowed?
Is an oath worth the weight of a crown?
Now, I don't think any of these books will really have a lot to do with Avowed, except for the vanishing of the godlikes. That might have a relation just because it has to do with the godlikes disappearing, and we know that that's happening at the time of Avowed. And it definitely could be a separate thing compared to what this book is talking about, but it's just an interesting little coincidence, so I think that's something I'm going to keep an eye on. But these are 3 different apocalypses, and then a 4th kind of like alludement to what happens after the apocalypse within this world. And so like there is this looming threat that the world of Eora could end at any point in time, and it seems like the gods are definitely involved pretty much in every single one of them. And so are the gods involved at all with what's going on with the Dream Scourge? Is it a worldwide threat? Is this something that would have been written in one of these books, but we just didn't have access to it in the games before? I don't know. I don't think any one of these are going to be directly involved, again, except for the vanishing of the godlikes. But I do think that these ideas of the world ending is a really interesting idea to keep in the back of our minds, and especially as we explore some new lore in Avowed, to see if there's any ways that we could link them up, like the voice of nothing coming from nowhere, heard by no one. I don't know. That, for me, that's always staying in my head. So that's all I can think of what it might have to do with Avowed, but I'm interested in hearing what anyone else has to say. Now, before I close off the episode, I'll let you know what I've been playing, even though I haven't been playing much because of the Christmas season. But I recently upgraded my computer so that I could play Avowed when it released on my PC. Unfortunately, I'm having some issues with my PC, which might interrupt episodes coming out. It's not so much my PC is the issue, but myself. I have chronic tinnitus, which a lot of you may know, where I have ringing in my ears, and I don't know how, but I got this thought in my head that my new components, something about the way they run, might affect my tinnitus, and I don't think that that's true, but I haven't been able to stop thinking about it since I thought that thought. I don't know if anyone else can relate to that, and so it's been impacting my use of the PC, and I'm going to, hopefully I can just get over it soon, but it's been a weird couple of weeks, so that's kind of where I'm at with that. We'll see how well it works, whether I play Avowed on the computer or I just go on the console until I get past it. Either way, I'm going to be playing Avowed for sure. But I've been playing Chained Together on my PC because it was one I couldn't run before. Or at least I don't think so. And that game has just been super fun. Me, my brother, and his lady are playing that together. And I honestly didn't expect us to really beat it. And we haven't yet, but we're close to the end. So we're in the final stretch of that game. And it's just a goofy game. It's been fun. I've also downloaded the Outer Worlds Spacer's Choice Edition to kind of run some next-gen level stuff on this computer. And I have everything on Ultra, and it loads really fast. It's just great. I love having the new hardware. It's good. So hopefully I keep it. Anyways, that's what I've been up to. I played a lot of stuff over the holidays. I did play Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. It was a phenomenal game. Would have been a great contender for Game of the Year, but I think it was just out too late. I know there was a lot of drama over Game of the Year stuff, and there's been a lot of drama actually in the gaming world lately, right? With DEI and all that kind of thing. And I'm not going to talk about it here because that's not what we're here to talk about on today's show, even though I definitely have opinions. But if you have opinions as well, feel free to email them and we can talk about it that way. Or if you want to hear about it on this show, I guess let me know as well, and I'll turn this show into a gaming controversy show. I don't know. Anyways, my son needs to go down for a nap, and he is being argumentative, so I'm going to log off for the show. Thanks, everyone. I'm your host, Eric, a.k.a. Gingerino, and I will see you guys next time.